Hey everyone, my name's Sam, a member of Group 9, along with Emma, Josh, Scotty, and Alex. Today we're going to be presenting about depression through the lenses of our specific classes. We're really proud of what we came up with. I guess the only thing left to say is that we hope you enjoy our presentation and learn something beneficial from it.
There are a couple definitions of depression, but this one on the PowerPoint encompasses a lot of what we will be talking about today. Depression is a medical illness that negatively affects the way a person feels, thinks, and acts.
We will cover this more in depth later, but something to know about the symptoms that are on the presentation now is that feeling sad and loss of interest or pleasure and changes in appetite and the sleeping changes, all of those things can be physical or social, emotional. They affect each person differently in terms of how they interact with other people and what their family life is like. All these little things come into consideration in what makes that person's depression unique. But nevertheless, it is pretty common for people to have noticeable physical changes, especially in how they act around other people or how much they sleep or just in general, like their level of energy. It makes them less likely to want to do things that they would normally like.
Scientists have thought for many years that depression was just the cause of a chemical imbalance in the brain. But with recent advancements in technology that we've seen over the past few years, we've seen more of what's actually going on inside the brain when somebody gets diagnosed. With new advancements in the medical field, scientists have been able to identify different kinds of genes in the brain that can make others more vulnerable to having low moods. This can also influence how they respond to having different types of drug therapies and could also potentially help us in the long run when treating people diagnosed with depression.
How is depression disabling physically? Well, many people who have a physical disability can often form depression due to the hardships that come with having a disability. But in comparison, having depression can also lead to physical disabilities. For instance, symptoms of depression are change in sleeping habits, change in energy levels, change in daily behaviors, and unhealthy appetite changes. Eating disorders are a huge physical disability that having depression can cause. Some examples of eating disorders are bulimia, anorexia, and binge eating. Studies have shown that people with anorexia are 50 times more likely to die from suicide, which can also be a huge side effect of having depression. Another aspect is unhealthy eating habits. From someone who is depressed can lead to obesity, and obesity can be physically disabling in so many ways, such as heart problems, physical movements, and much more.
Depression not only affects somebody physically, it can affect them emotionally and socially. In general, there's a loss of interest from the person, a change in social interaction. The person might not want to laugh at your jokes as often. It completely changes the way they interact with other people. You might be wondering the purpose for the pictures that our group has chosen to put on this slide. For the two pictures on the left under physical, that has to do with the eating disorders that those who are depressed can develop, or those who have eating disorders can then develop depression. The very moody blacks on the far left one kind of show the darkness and the reality to the eating disorder, while the other one shows how the bone can protrude from the skin, which is often a sign of malnourishment and of an eating disorder. I'm fine is a very common trend that I've heard along with my group mates as teenagers growing up in this time. It's just something people will say, and it's it's just a cop out. You are not uh, really fine. You are depressed. You are alone, and it is hard. The second picture shows how those who are depressed can develop suicidal thoughts. And the third one is actually one of my own pictures. It's of my friend screaming. I think I was reflecting on how emotionally people will deny how they really feel, and this photograph is about showing what you feel. People who are depressed are more likely to have these outbreaks of um, anger and rage and frustration with the world and themselves. I would definitely say there is a societal issue with the way everyone views depression, especially in relation to work. Something that I found very interesting in the articles that I was reading for this project was that if you take a leave of absence, if you have depression, you're twice as likely as somebody who doesn't have depression to take another leave of absence. I think people should pay attention to how depression is being treated nowadays.
Me and Josh explored the biblical perspective of having depression. I said how depression is not often a medical or mental problem, but it's instead of it's a problem of being a human being. It traces back to times with Adam and Eve and eating the forbidden fruit. But there are also some misconceptions about having depression in the church and how that may lead people to say, like, oh, you haven't completely given your body up for Christ. Otherwise, you wouldn't be depressed. You wouldn't be sad if you had Christ in your life. Oh, you're doing something wrong. This must be why you haven't accepted Christ, and that's why you're depressed. So it often leads to the church being a place for ridicule rather than truth and love.
While depression itself is not named as a disorder in the Bible, there are a few biblical figures that did suffer from depression. A few noteworthy ones were King David, Moses, and Jesus Christ at a certain point. I have chosen to focus on, for the biblical perspective of our integrated assignment, is the prophet Jeremiah, also known as the Weeping Prophet. He was a prophet who was told by God to preach and inform people about the destruction of Jerusalem. He was forbidden to marry or have children, and he lived alone and impoverished, but he kept his faith in God. We also see him many times wrought with despair and shame and failure throughout his story.
And with that, on behalf of all of us, I'd like to say thank you for listening. And like we said before, we hope you learned something beneficial, and we hope we gave you some thoughts to ponder. Here are our citations.